Matthew, back to you. We got a question about what our expectations are for upcoming recessions or even depressions. And so one of the things that I can touch on is that from a stock market performance standpoint, the largest and most significant bear markets have coincided with recessions. And so there is a concern as well that when the Fed begins tightening interest rates, that could actually lead to a recession. Well, I can share with the folks some interesting research from Ned Davis Research, which is a very highly regarded economic and markets research institution, that when the Fed has historically raised interest rates, that there's two types of cycles. There is a slow tightening cycle and a fast tightening cycle. And that stock market returns in the fast tightening cycles over the following 12 months is actually negative 2.7. But in the slow tightening cycles, it actually is much more positive, around 10.5%, and not leading to a recession. However, once the Fed has begun a tightening cycle, historically, the median is that growth begins to slow in year two, and that the average recession begins about 25 months after the tightening cycle starts. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Matthew, and any further comments you might want to make about recessions on the horizon, possibly risk of depression, a much more serious recession.
Sure. Yeah. So my answers may not be all that satisfying in this sense that is that, there's, first of all, we believe that the overwhelming majority of recessions, well, first of all, I should start with a joke, right? The joke about forecasters is forecasters predicted 12 of the last 8 recessions. Yep. Right. And so the reality is, I think what that hints at is that recessions are unforecastable in this sense. Someone said once that economic expansions don't die of old age. Right? We were talking about this just 2 years ago. The longest expansion in recorded history. Right? They don't die of old age. Something has to kill them, right? And so that's to say, it usually takes an outside shock in order to switch regimes from a growth regime to a contraction regime. Now, in that a pandemic can be that, a financial crisis, right? A geopolitical crisis could easily push the United States into recession, and so. In that sense, we don't have a structural forecast model that allows us to predict recessions. And so it's pretty tricky. I will say this, sort of qualitatively and subjectively, I definitely, so I think that the things you talked about rapid tightening and slow tightening regimes, in either case, the normal situation is that we are sort of at the top of the business cycle, right? And so we've had a recession 6, 7, however many years ago. There's been a period of economic expansion that's accelerating, and the Fed is worried about the economy, quote unquote, overheating, right? And so that usually causes price increases. And then the Fed steps in to slow that so that the economy doesn't overheat. Obviously, what they're trying to do is they're trying to moderate the business cycles to turn it from one like this to one that's smoother, right? And there's a critique of whether or not that's even possible. But nonetheless, this is a very different environment that we're talking about today, because we are much closer to the trough of economic activity than we are to the peak in the next business cycle. And yet we're in a situation where we have to, make no mistake, there needs to be a rapid tightening of policy in order to tame the inflation that we're experiencing right now. And so that's scary, right? Candidly, I think this is uncharted territory. The Fed doesn't know what the response is. They're also not operating from a rules-based monetary policy, right? They believe in a discretionary approach where at each stage they will take inputs and then pick the policy that they believe will produce the best outcome, right? And so it's not even predictable what they will do based on the information. And so it's uncharted territory. It is very possible that the rapid tightening that would be required to stem inflation could push the U.S. into recession. My hunch is they don't get that far. That financial markets will send really strong signals first. And those signals, to be clear, are not necessarily that the economy is going to crash. there's simply going to be a flight from riskier assets once there's a positive real return in safer assets. You know, there'll sort of be a realignment of investment dollars, which will produce a significant correction in asset prices. And my hunch is that the Fed will pull back. And I'm really just using 2018, 2019 as sort of the guidepost there. That would be my best prediction. That means inflation, right? That means inflation continues. And I think that's reflected in inflation expectations right now.